The average homeowner in America is 38 times wealthier than the average renter. Not 2 times, not 5 times, 38 times. If you're renting right now and watching your friends buy houses, that number just landed on your chest. You were told 2 paths to wealth: buy a house or invest in the market. Nobody told you the real answer isn't either one. It's why that gap even exists in the first place. Stick around, because the data on this is almost the opposite of what both sides of this argument keep shouting at you. Okay, let's slow down for a second, because I know exactly where your head is right now. You grew up hearing the same sentence over and over. Buy a house. That's how you build wealth. Your parents said it. Your grandparents said it. It was basically gospel. And then you grew up and looked at the numbers, and the math stopped making sense. A median home in the United States right now runs around $403,000. 6 years ago, that same median home was closer to $329,000. That's not a small climb. That's a house getting roughly 22% more expensive, while your paycheck did not move like that at all. Meanwhile, you keep hearing another camp online. Skip the house. Just put your money in an index fund. They show you charts of the stock market going up and to the right for decades. And it looks so simple. So which one is it? Who's actually right here? Here's the part nobody validates enough. You're not confused because you're bad with money. You're confused because both sides are technically telling you true numbers. Just not the whole picture. So let's actually look at the whole picture. No hype from either side. Let's start with the number that gets thrown around the most. Stock market returns. Since the S&P 500 launched in 1957, it has averaged close to a 10% return per year. Adjusted for inflation, that real return settles closer to 7% a year. 7% a year sounds boring, but compounding is not boring. It's just quiet for a long time and then suddenly loud. $10,000 invested and left alone for 30 years at that historical average grows into roughly $186,000 in today's buying power. Now here's the housing side of that same math. Home prices, long-term, have historically climbed around 3 to 5% a year nationally. That's appreciation alone. Before you subtract property tax, insurance, maintenance, and interest paid to the bank. So on pure return percentage, stocks have historically out-earned real estate. That part is not really debatable. Which raises the obvious question. If stocks win on paper, why does that homeowner versus renter wealth gap look the way it does? This is the part that trips up almost everyone arguing about this online. They're comparing the wrong thing entirely. Here's the variable that changes everything: leverage. When you buy a house, you are not investing with your own money. You are investing with the bank's money. Say you buy a $400,000 house with 20% down. That's $80,000 of your own cash. If that house appreciates just 4% in a year, that's $16,000 of gain. $16,000 of gain on an $80,000 investment is not a 4% return. It's a 20% return on your actual cash. That's the entire secret. Real estate doesn't beat the stock market on appreciation. It beats it on leverage. You can't walk into a brokerage and borrow $320,000 at a fixed rate just to buy index funds. Banks don't work that way for stocks, but they will absolutely hand you that same leverage for a house, because the house itself is the collateral. That's why real estate quietly outperforms in net worth statistics, even while underperforming in pure return statistics. Different math entirely. But leverage cuts both ways, and this is where it gets interesting. What if that $80,000 down payment never went into a house at all? What if you took that same $80,000 and put it straight into an index fund instead? At a 10% average annual return, $80,000 left alone for 30 years grows to roughly $1,400,000. That's the opportunity cost of a down payment. Every dollar you lock into a house is a dollar that stops compounding somewhere else. This doesn't mean buying is wrong. It means the down payment is not free money you're just parking. It has a cost, even when nothing goes wrong. Most people never run this comparison because a house feels like saving and the stock market still feels like gambling to a lot of Americans. The data doesn't support that feeling, but the feeling is real, and it drives real decisions. There's a second hidden force at play here, and it's honestly more psychological than financial. A mortgage payment is mandatory. If you don't pay it, you lose your house. So you pay it. An index fund contribution is optional. Life happens, and optional things get skipped. Every mortgage payment you make quietly moves a little bit into your own equity, whether you're thinking about it or not. Most renters who say they'll invest the difference between rent and a mortgage payment simply don't. Not because they're irresponsible, because life is expensive and unplanned things happen. So real estate wins for a lot of normal Americans, not because it's a smarter investment. It wins because it's an investment you're forced to keep making. Index funds require discipline that has to be renewed every single month for 30 years straight. A mortgage removes that decision from your hands entirely. That's not weakness. That's just how human behavior actually works. Now let's go back to that number from the cold open, because it deserves real context. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the median homeowner's net worth sits around $396,200. The median renter's net worth in that same survey sits around $10,400. That gap has been widening for over 3 decades, not shrinking. But here's the detail almost nobody mentions when they quote that stat. Home equity is only about half of the average homeowner's net worth. The other half comes from other assets entirely. Retirement accounts, savings, and yes, index funds. Homeowners are simply more likely to be building wealth on multiple fronts at once, not just through their house. So the real story isn't real estate versus index funds. It's that people who own homes tend to also be the people who invest. Owning a home doesn't replace investing. In the real data, it usually shows up alongside it. Now let's talk about the side of this that almost never gets mentioned. Risk and liquidity. An index fund is spread across 500 different companies. If one company collapses, your fund barely notices. A house is one asset, in one neighborhood, in one local economy. There is zero diversification in a single address. And real estate is not immune to crashing either. During the 2008 crisis, national home prices fell roughly 27% from peak to bottom. That crash didn't just dent portfolios, it wiped out entire families who had almost all their net worth sitting in one house with a mortgage on top of it. The stock market has its own scars too. It dropped nearly 38% in 2008 and around 34% during the 2020 crash. The difference is what happens after. If your index fund drops 30%, you can wait it out and keep contributing at lower prices. If your house drops 30% and you need to sell because of a job loss or a move, that loss becomes real and permanent immediately. Liquidity matters more than people think. Selling a house takes weeks of listing time, plus another month or so to close. Selling shares in an index fund takes a couple of business days. That difference matters enormously in an emergency. Here's another piece that rarely makes it into the debate. What it actually costs to get in and out of each one. Buying and selling a home typically costs somewhere between 8 and 10% of the home's value once you add agent commissions, closing costs, and fees. On a $400,000 home, that's roughly $32,000 to $40,000, just in transaction costs alone. An index fund, by comparison, often charges an expense ratio under 0.1% per year, with no fee at all to buy or sell. That gap alone can eat years of appreciation gains if you buy and sell a house within a short window. This is exactly why real estate rewards people who stay put for a long time and punishes people who move every few years. If you know you're relocating in 2 or 3 years, that transaction cost alone can turn a rising market into a personal loss. Taxes change this conversation more than most people realize, and both sides have real advantages here. When you sell your primary home after living in it for at least 2 of the last 5 years, up to $250,000 of profit is tax-free for a single filer. For a married couple filing jointly, that tax-free profit exclusion doubles to $500,000. That is one of the most generous tax breaks available to normal Americans, and it exists specifically for primary homes, not investment properties. Stock market gains don't get that same free pass. Sell your index fund after holding it more than a year, and you'll owe long-term capital gains tax on the profit. Depending on your income, that federal rate typically lands somewhere between 0 and 20% of the gain. So a house you actually live in has a real tax advantage baked in, as long as you stay long enough to qualify for it. Here's something that makes this whole debate almost impossible to answer with one universal rule. Location changes everything. In states like Iowa and Kansas, a typical home costs less than 3 years of the local median household income. In Hawaii, that same ratio stretches past 8 years of income. In California, it sits close to 8 years as well. That means the exact same down payment and the exact same income can put you in a starter home in one state and completely lock you out in another. In lower-cost states, real estate math tends to work faster and easier because the leverage effect kicks in on a smaller, more affordable loan. In high-cost coastal metros, renting and investing, the difference often makes far more mathematical sense, simply because the entry price is so extreme. So when someone tells you confidently that one option always wins, ask them which zip code they're talking about, because the honest answer changes by state. Let's actually run both scenarios side by side, using simple, rounded numbers, just to see the shape of it. Scenario 1. You buy a $400,000 home with $80,000 down at a 6.5% 30-year mortgage. After 10 years, assuming modest 3% annual appreciation, that home is worth roughly $537,000. After 10 years of payments, your remaining loan balance has dropped to somewhere near $269,000. That puts your total equity, appreciation, plus paydown at somewhere around $268,000 after a decade. Scenario 2. You rent instead, and you invest that same $80,000 into an index fund at a 10% average return. After 10 years, that $80,000 alone grows to roughly $207,000 before adding a single extra dollar of ongoing contributions. If you also invest the monthly gap between your rent and what a mortgage payment would have cost, that renter scenario can pull ahead of the homeowner's equity within that same decade. These are simplified examples, not exact predictions. Real mortgage rates, appreciation rates, and rent gaps all vary by market and by year, but the pattern holds. Home ownership wins fastest when leverage and forced savings are working for you. Investing wins fastest when the extra cash actually gets invested every single month, without fail. Now let's be honest about why buying a house feels so far out of reach right now, because this part is real too. In 1960, the median home cost about 2.2 times the median household income. Today, that ratio sits between 5 and 7 times income nationally, and even higher in a lot of coastal cities. That is not a small shift. That's an entirely different math problem than the one your parents solved. The national home ownership rate right now sits around 65.7%, still below the 2004 peak of 69.2%. For Americans under 35, ownership has dropped from around 44% 2 decades ago to under 38% today. So if you feel locked out, you are not imagining it. The starting line genuinely moved further away. This is why the identity crisis is real. The path your parents walked and the path in front of you are not the same path. That doesn't mean wealth building's closed off to you. It means the tool that used to work automatically now needs a different strategy built around it. So here's the actual verdict. No hedge, no fence sitting. For pure long-term return on your own dollar, index funds have historically outperformed real estate appreciation. For total household net worth, homeowners have historically ended up ahead, mainly because of leverage and forced monthly discipline, not because houses grow in value faster. For risk and flexibility, index funds win clearly. They're diversified, liquid, and cheap to buy and sell. For tax advantages on a home you actually live in, real estate wins clearly, as long as you stay long enough to qualify. If you can only do one right now, an index fund costs you far less to start and never asks you for a 20% down payment. If home ownership becomes possible for you later, it adds leverage and forced savings on top of whatever you've already built. The people with the highest net worth in the data aren't choosing between these two. They're stacking both, just in different seasons of life. Renting while investing consistently is not falling behind. It's running the version of the race that's actually available to you right now. The American dream told you there was one door. The real numbers say there were always two, and you don't have to pick just one forever. You don't need your parents' path to end up in the same place they did. You need your own version of consistency. If you're the kind of person who wants the real numbers instead of the noise everyone else is shouting, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe and become one of us at The Wealth Metrics. Real numbers, no noise.